Okay. Well, good evening, Placerville, and welcome to this special meeting of the Placerville City Council on Thursday, August 20th. Will everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to, yes. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, and we will start with roll call, please.
Mayor Saragosa,
Here.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Here.
Councilmember Acuna,
Present.
Councilmember Borelli,
Here.
and Councilmember Taylor is recusing herself tonight because she sat on the Cannabis Selection Committee. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Mayor, just note if you need to adjust that volume, you can do it on the volume control on the phone. That was a little loud, I know. Can you see where that is?
Yes.
Push this down a little bit.
I don't know.
Okay.
Miss O'Connell as the voice of God, I thought was pretty good though, so it worked out. Okay, item 3, announcements, presentations to the public. Do we have anything this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the adoption of the agenda.
Move for the adoption.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to the public comment portion of the agenda.
Mayor,
Yes.
the public comment is a little different with the special meeting. The government code does not provide for public comment on unagendized items at a special meeting. That's only at a regular meeting where that can occur. So that any public comment tonight is limited to the agenda items before the council tonight. People have the opportunity now, if they want to comment on those items, or as the council gets to those items, I know there'll be a public comment available at that time as well.
Okay. I always learn something new.
Some
So,
difference then on the other.
Yes, the government code allows for public comment on unagendized items at regular meetings, but at special meetings, you only have to provide a public comment either before or after, or at the time you're discussing the agendized items, and the comments can only relate to the agendized items.
Okay.
okay. All right, well, with that explanation from our city attorney then, we will move on to written communications.
Mayor and council, there are a couple of written communication items. They are related to the agenda items though, so nothing further to report.
Okay, thank you. We will then move on to item 5.2, which are oral communications. And again, these have to be related to this evening's hearings. So with that, we'll open up public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go ahead and start with, I'm going to read a letter that was received yesterday to the City Council regarding cannabis facilities. This is from Mark Herr, H-E-R-R. And he writes, Council members, although I do not have any problems with the true medicinal use of cannabis products that are not smoked or have THC in them, the CBD portion has proven uses. With that said, I do not believe, nor have I seen any empirical evidence that suggests that inhaling a carcinogen, smoking, a substance that has low CBD and high THC content is a healthy avenue for any ailment. It is purely to get high. Second, licensing facilities is only a small portion of the problem. Anyone who wishes to purchase marijuana for just recreational use can get a permit from an unethical doctor that will issue licenses without much background. Properly licensed facilities to distribute is only one factor that helps to alleviate the criminal element that surrounds this product, but it does not address the recreational addicts. Until there is roadside sobriety testing available, the streets are not safe with people driving around high on a daily basis. On a daily basis, I witness individuals smoking pot while driving through the city, lighting up as they get off work or on a break, and then driving. It has been an illegal product for so many years that eliminating that criminal element is virtually impossible. We saw this with the shooting death of one of our local deputies last year. Let us not forget this. The city of Placerville already has a horrible homeless population, and a large majority of those have either mental or substance abuse issues. Unless other remedies to handle the blatant disregard of issuing cannabis permits is addressed, I do not believe the city should even consider allowing any facilities within city limits. Thank you, Mark. And I have a second one that I will read to you. This was received today from Rick Sergi. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. He says, hello, Regina. I'm attaching a letter from Ron L. Barber to be read at tonight's special council meeting. And so I'll read this letter now from Ron Barber. He writes, all concerned, my name is Ron Barber and I own the Broadway Plaza Shopping Center in Placerville. As a landlord, I am facing the uncertainty shared by commercial property owners all across California and the country whose tenants are losing their businesses during the pandemic. I currently lease to a cannabis retail business in Vallejo, and one of the owners who has applied for a permit at my Placerville property as Tranquil Meadows. These individuals have proven to be reliable and responsible tenants for many years. I would strongly encourage the city to allow all the final round applicants to pursue the permitting process in order to maximize the benefit to residents, local property owners, and the bottom line for the city budget. These businesses will provide needed income for landlords, renovations, and upgrades to older buildings, and much needed jobs for the Placerville community. Please feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions. And then he includes his phone number and email address. Sincerely, Ron Barber. So we'll open this up now to public comment. This related to items on this agenda.
Regina, I think it'd be good if we remind people that they will be able also to public comment at the time the council addresses the particular agenda item. So if they talk now, they won't be able to talk then. They may want to wait until then when it's a little more specific. Unless they can't be here for that portion. If they can't be here, then that would be the time to make their comments. Otherwise, I would suggest it'd be more efficient for them to wait until the council actually takes up the item.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So I don't see any hands raised, Mr. Mayor, but if anybody did want to speak that may not be able to speak later on an item, now is your chance to speak. Raise your hand. You can press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining by phone. You'll have 3 minutes. Anybody wishing to speak, please raise your hand now if you're not able to speak on the item later. I see no hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Regina. So with that, we will close the public comment portion of tonight's agenda and move on to item 6, to the public hearings. Item 6.1, consider adoption of resolutions granting in part and denying in part appeals filed by Canatopia and Partners, Element 7, 3 Habitat Consulting, and TMG Placerville, and make findings in support thereof. And with that, I believe our city attorney has this report for us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll address this item or at least make the introductory remarks regarding staff report. As the council knows, on July 16th, the council took separate action on each of the appeals and directed staff to come back with formal findings consistent with the council's action and decision on each of those appeals. This item is to formalize those findings in the resolution of each appeal, consistent with the council's determination and action on July 16th. So I would remind the council that the public hearings on each appeal are closed, that public comment should be limited to the issue of whether the findings and resolutions are consistent with your action on July 16th, but that no new evidence relating to the merits of any of the appeals should be accepted at this time. We've tried to put together detailed findings that are very consistent with your action and what the minutes reflect for the July 16th meeting. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Ashley is, I believe, joining us by Zoom, and she may want to add something, or she's also available to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Driscoll. Ms. Zambrano, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add at this point?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't have anything to add at this point, but I am available for any questions if you have any.
Okay, great, thank you. So any questions for staff at this point, Council?
None.
I don't have any, not right now. I probably will later.
Okay, we'll go ahead then and open it up for public comments. And again, the public comments would be relegated to if the findings are consistent within this, not new evidence or new findings.
All right, public comment is now open for item 6.1. We'll start with Patrick Goggin.
Good evening, Patrick.
Sorry, I'm there now. Patrick Goggin for Canatopia. I appreciate the city attorney's comments on this being reserved to the findings. We accept those findings. We just reserve an opportunity to speak on the next item and address how things are going to move forward substantively from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you.
Now taking public comment from Josh Black.
Yes, good evening. My name is Josh Black from Element 7.
Good evening.
Good evening, how are you? Honourable Mayor, council members, city staff and constituents of the city. So Element 7 had collaborated with 3 of the other applicants, Reserve House, Canatopia and Chuck's, to submit a letter last week where we had expressed an interest in working together as an industry to try and have all of the applicants approved to operate a license and effectively let the free market determine, who would be successful and who would get operations up and running. And we would be very delighted to see that happen and, commence operations in the city, start hiring locals and create some tax revenue. So thank you.
Thank you.
Last call for item 6.1, public comment. Rick S., go ahead.
Good evening. Rick, are you on mute still?
Okay, am I there now?
You are. Good evening.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Rick Seregi with Tranquil Meadows. As the gentleman before me, we put together a letter with there was 3 of us that were applicants, One Plant Placerville, Dry Diggings Cannabis, and Tranquil Meadows that put a similar letter together saying we would like to see all the qualified applicants receive permits. The letter was pretty detailed in explaining why, the landscape is just different. When Placerville came down this road and the citizens voted for it a couple of years ago, everything's changed. And you got a bunch of guys that are qualified, good business people. There's more applicants, qualified applicants than there are permits. We can let time decide how many applicants will be able to survive or even get opened at this point in Placerville. If you have 10 permits and they're going to hire 10 people, with 3 people, you'd have 30 employees. Now you're looking at 100 jobs possibly for the city of Placerville. And the income that would come in, taking it off the black market, like that one letter that said it would help the black market, keeping it secured. And what it would do for the retail landscape in Placerville. The rentals are needed. You know, you got guys willing to buy buildings, renovate them, and people that are going to pay rent to landlords that need the rents. So that's the frame of mind that we're in also, is let the qualified applicants, you know, let the market decide how many, not a arbitrary number through a point-based system that could be appealed again. Maybe, who knows, you know, what would happen if you go through the same process again. So that's it, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments.
Now taking public comment from Xenia.
Good evening.
Hello, I'm Xenia Gilg. Are you hearing me okay?
We are.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for allowing me to appear remotely. I am living in the Bay Area, and I felt that it would be rather irresponsible for me to take up room on the highways when people are evacuating from the fire, and also during the pandemic to expose others to somebody from the Bay Area. So I appreciate you taking my comments remotely. I just want to ensure that my sacred roots will be mostly about what the next steps would be. With regard to the resolutions, I think that that's what we're discussing presently. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So my only comment with the resolutions, I do believe that they reflect what happened at the July 16th meeting. As I indicated in the letter that I submitted on July 30th, I believe that the city manager's decision was appropriate and within his discretion. But I agree that what is in the resolution reflects what happened at the last meeting. So I just didn't want to not make my comments on the totality of the meeting. But I want to reserve my comments for the next section. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Last call for public comment on item 6.1. No further comments, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And was there anybody upstairs that, no, okay. All right then, we will go ahead and close public comments on item 6.1 and bring it back to the council for further discussion.
I had a question for our legal counsel.
Yep.
Mr. Driscoll, would you prefer individual motions for each one of these appeals? Yes, I think we should do each one individually. Thank you. I'd be prepared to do that if you're ready, Mr. Mayor.
If you're gonna do it, you gotta, so they can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to proposing a resolution of the City Council of the City of Placerville granting in part and denying in part the appeal filed by Canatopia Partners, Inc. regarding the city manager's selection of applicants for cannabis business permits and make findings in support thereof.
I will second that.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Any other further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead for a roll call vote, please.
Mayor Saragosa,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Acuna,
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to approve a resolution of the City Council, City of Placerville, granting in part and denying in part the appeal filed by Element 7, Placerville LLC, regarding the city manager's selection of applicants for cannabis business permits and make findings in support thereof.
I will second that one as well.
Okay, first and second, any other further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Saragosa,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Acuna,
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli.
Aye.
Okay, the resolution passes 4-0.
Mr. Mayor, if you're ready.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution, the City Council, City of Placerville, granting in part and denying in part the appeal filed by 3 Habitat Consulting, Placerville, regarding the city manager's selection of applicants for the cannabis business permit and make findings in support thereof.
I'll second that one.
Further discussion, seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Saragosa,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Acuna,
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli.
Aye.
Okay, again, that measure passed, or that resolution passes. And we're on to TMG resolution.
And so if it's pleases the council, I'll make a resolution, the city council, City of Placerville granting in part and denying in part the appeal filed by TMG Placerville LLC regarding the city manager's selection of applicants for cannabis business permits and make findings in support thereof.
I will second that one.
Okay, further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Saragosa,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Acuna,
Aye.
Councilmember.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
I would like to thank our attorneys that presented and put these together. I think they were extremely well done and helped represent exactly what we were trying to say there. So thank you for the effort and the time that you put into that, because I know it was important. I know it's important to us, but I know you spent a lot of time to make sure you got it just right. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor.
Okay, we will go ahead and move on to item 6.2, and that's discussion and direction regarding the next steps and proposed process for cannabis business permit issuance. And again, our city attorney has this for us this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And on this issue, I'm going to ask Ashley Dembrano, our associate attorney from Best Krieger, to do the introduction of the staff.
Okay. The floor is yours, Ashley.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I apologize for not being there in person with you tonight. And I don't think you can see me on the screen either, so I apologize for that as well. Hopefully you can hear me okay. As you know, at the conclusion of the last special city council meeting on the cannabis appeals, the city council unanimously voted to develop a new application process for evaluating the cannabis business permit applicants, with specific direction for staff to develop those procedures and bring them back to the council for further feedback and consideration. Council's specific motion is included on the first page of the staff report for this agenda item for reference. Accordingly, the staff report details the process that the city envisions utilizing for an evaluation of the applicants. Some of the key components include setting a new application window whereby applicants interested in still being considered must notify the city of their intent to submit their application for review. This would allow the process to work more like an opt-in for reevaluation instead of obliging the city to review all applications if certain applicants are unwilling or unable to move forward. We also propose limiting the review to the original applications as submitted. This will help expedite the process by eliminating review of completely new applications. This is not to force an absolute prohibition on new or changed information, but it would keep the process focused on re-reviewing the applications instead of creating a new application period. The cannabis ordinance already contains procedures for how to process and evaluate new locations or new ownership, and so we feel that once applicants are selected and permits are issued, those provisions would kick in for purposes of handling the new information. We also propose that a new review committee evaluate the applications using the same or similar scoring criteria previously used in phase 3, but with clearer guidelines on how total points are awarded within each category, including an interview score and allowing recommendations on tied applicants to be based on proposed location. We propose that the review committee would rank applicants based on score and that the council would award permits based on that ranked list, with some discretion in the event of an overconcentration of businesses in a single area. As noted in the staff report, this is one of the primary areas that we are seeking additional feedback and direction. Additional details on the proposed process are contained in the staff report, all of which may be subject to further direction if it pleases the council. Now, as also noted in the staff report, there's been a lot of written comments from various applicants regarding council's decision to restart the process. Many, if not all of those comments, focus on a desire to instead render a decision on final permit issuance based on some other alternative basis. Accordingly, we also prepared some analysis of those options in the staff report and our recommendations. If the council desires to discuss and consider those options instead of providing feedback, Our recommendation is that the council formally adopt a motion for reconsideration of the original motion that's noted in your staff report. A motion for reconsideration can be made by anyone in the majority, meaning any one of you, because the motion was adopted by a 4-0 vote. The motion for reconsideration would have to pass before discussion of a new alternative motion could take place. If the motion for reconsideration fails, the original motion stands. And I'll reserve any comments or questions that you may have on those alternatives if we get to that point in the meeting. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zambrano. Mr. Driscoll, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Not at this point.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Question?
well, when I look at this, we have what they recommended based on our motion that we had, or based on the what we passed last meeting, and then we have their recommendation. And it would seem like I almost want to flip-flop those before we start, looking at going down the road and creating a new process. Do we want to actually consider or reconsider what we did before we start thinking and make that decision if we want to reconsider first before we start thinking about leaving that behind and moving forward?
Right.
Is that a...
You can utilize that process, and Ashley, feel free to jump in on this, because you and I did talk about this afternoon, and this very issue in terms of, which is going to come first, chicken or the egg, so to speak. But I think you can do that, and then just determine whether or not you feel comfortable going in for the different direction, and based upon that, float the motion to reconsider. Ashley, your comments on that?
No, I concur with what you said. I think it's okay and appropriate if you'd like to consider some of those other options first. I think procedure would just mean, you'd have to move for a motion for reconsideration first. If it passes, then you're free to discuss. If it doesn't, then you still have opportunity to provide direction later.
Okay.
So would it seem like we should hold at this point until we've decided what our wishes are this evening? I don't want to take a bunch of public comment if we're not going to go someplace with it.
Correct.
I agree.
Correct.
So I guess a procedural question is, if I wanted to make a motion to reconsider.
No, I do.
So if I want to make a motion to reconsider, do we need to have any public comment before we move down that road?
That was my question.
Before you make the motion,
Right.
or before you vote?
Before you vote.
Before we vote.
Before we vote. So once we have a second, then I would open it up for public comment on the recommendation,
If you would.
on the reconsideration, excuse me.
Yes.
Okay.
So if it please, I'd like to make a motion then reconsider. I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the action we took at last meeting to reopen the application process.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Clarification.
I was just gonna say,
Do we want to address the application process, or do we want to address the applicant, the existing applicants?
I think that's a good question.
Would be the,
Just so you know, if you make a motion to reconsider, it doesn't mean that you're not going to go back to the application process. You're allowing yourself to consider other alternatives as well.
right.
it's
So
not
so
locking us in.
But our vice mayor,
You're not locked in.
if he would shorten his motion to just make a motion to reconsider, is that clarifying enough?
Well, while we're reconsidering
yeah, we're reconsidering,
the applicants.
The motion would be to reconsider your previous action as reflected in the staff report.
Okay, withdraw and I'll restate. I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the actions we took in our previous meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
okay, so we have a first and a second. Any further discussion on that at this point? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open up public comment on the motion.
Public comment is now open for 6.2. We'll start with Patrick Goggin.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Patrick Goggin for Canatopia. We would like to strongly urge you to reconsider and not to start the process over from scratch. This alternative is unreasonably expensive for applicants and the city, would cause an unreasonable delay with no access to cannabis in Placerville and the region, and is an unreasonable delay in generating much needed city revenues. We would urge you to support and consider the staff report's alternative 3, which was supported by the group letter that Canatopia participated in and that you have sitting before you. We urge you to move forward with issuing 5 to 6 permits now to the selected applicants and to the qualifying appellants. We would note that 3 habitats should probably not be included in that because they did not appear at the appeals hearing, and their BCC license in Palm Springs is apparently suspended. We urge you not to just go with phase 3 scoring. You've identified that the process has been problematic and questionable at this point, and it would be not prudent to rely upon the phase 3 scoring. And equally, we urge you not to go with the city manager's selection. We think that selection process was an abuse of discretion. There was no articulated justification for the deviation and the employing of discretion. Instead, we urge you to issue permits now. Employ discretion to expand, if necessary, to 5 to 6 permits, with providing 12 months to open operations. It's highly unlikely that all will get across the finish line, and if they do, the market will dictate the number the region can support. If the region supports all of these businesses and they stay into business, then that's what's needed. Some could fail, we don't know, but the most economical and legally sound decision is to reconsider and issue the 5 to 6 permits now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last call for item 6.2, public comment. All right, we'll take Josh Black.
Good evening.
Well, good evening again, everyone. Josh Black from Element 7. Patrick did a wonderful job expressing the views of Canatopia, and Element 7 shares those views. You know, nobody likes the referee in any sport. And we felt that the scores given by HDL, who are, you know, the most qualified and experienced consultant.
I'm sorry, Josh, can you maybe speak up a little bit more? It just got jumbled there for a sec.
Apologies for that, Mayor. So what I was saying was that we wholeheartedly agree with Patrick's comments, and, you know, feel that nobody likes the referee. The referee in this case was largely HDL, who gave the initial assessments. And, you know, HDL are a very experienced, qualified, and respected group within the industry. And we found them to be, you know, very consistent across most municipalities we've worked in. So we would encourage the council to consider the recommendation that Patrick put forward, awarding permits based on the earlier phase scores that HDL had clearly, you know, found several companies at the top of that list. Obviously, one of them was us, and that's what we would hopefully advocate for tonight, and let the free market decide on how many dispensaries can operate within the city, and who's going to be successful based on a solid, robust business plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Now taking public comment from Xenia.
Good evening again.
Good evening again. Thank you. As I stated in my July 30th letter, and as I'd like to reiterate based on a review of the application procedures, which were part of the city manager's evaluation, the city council found last time that this mid-appeal process was irregular, or that there was some kind of a flaw in that process, and that resulted in some unfair advantage to two of the chosen applicants. I'm failing to see how it is that the application process could not account for a situation in which the HDL makes a mistake and that there's an allowance for a correction, which is really what happened. Wasn't that they appealed and they added things that they had forgotten to put in or something of that nature. It was really a correction. And so my suggestion previously was that there is some fair advantage, that the only remedy, the best remedy, is to allow other applicants to correct anything that was incorrect and evaluate their score. But again, I think that the city manager, in all of the procedures I've read and in the ordinance itself, had the discretion to make a decision of who the top applicants were based more on just the scoring. It seems that the 80%, and if you look at the procedures, the 80% was just a threshold that had to be reached in order to get to the next level. It didn't necessarily mean that the people who had a 90 at that point were going to be chosen. It got them to that next stage, sort of like in the World Series. You play game one, you win. That doesn't mean you start at an advantage in game two. So I think the city manager made a well-reasoned decision, and well within his authority. And so I agree that the process should not start over. That I would argue that the city manager's decision should be adopted in full. But I think a much less severe remedy would be to allow those entities which felt that they had an incorrect score based on the LDH scoring or HDL scoring, be allowed to make those corrections. And if that has an impact on Mr. Morris's decision at that point, then that could be reevaluated. But that's a much lesser remedy than completely throwing everything out. And that concludes my remarks on that point.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just take one last call on 6.2. Rick, go ahead.
All right, we have.
Check for Rick, he's on the line.
What, Rick?
Okay, I'm sorry. It just popped up to unmute. Am I there now?
You are.
Okay, I apologize. This is Rick Sregi with Tranquil Meadows again. I wanted to talk about the first two gentlemen that spoke about starting the process and issuing the permits, which you might consider looking at now. The only difference I have is you had qualified applicants. If you decide 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you could still run into the same issue you had on the first run. If as many qualified applicants as you have given permits. The course we suggest builds on the city's process to date, which laid out the requirements for retail cannabis. It identified a manageable number of qualified applicants to resolve a point scoring system failed tremendously because you have very well qualified applicants, but not enough permits you were given to offer. So it started the appeals process, and that's where we are now. So if you go in favor of another scoring system, it's likely to suffer the same act of problems that will only lead to more delays, just like one of the other applicants just spoke about. We foster job creation immediately, sources of tax revenue, and let the attrition go. Let the market decide.
Okay, so we will go ahead and reconvene, and we have a speaker in person. Yes. Oh, in here, let me turn the,
Is that on?
yes.
Good afternoon, good evening, I guess it is. Good evening, council members. I am Placerville. I'm here appearing on behalf of TMG. The principal for TMG, Eddie Delfino, since he wrote that he can't be here tonight, also he's traveling for business. Thank you for undertaking this decision-making process again. I know it's difficult and challenging for you all. It's my understanding that at this particular moment, we're commenting on the question of reopening for consideration of the alternatives proposed by your council. I'll limit my comments to that for the moment. I would reserve the right to further comment if we go back to considering the selection process. TMG is not opposed to the multiple permit solution. I wrote a letter to you guys probably a month ago, which we agreed with that outcome. It's probably the outcome that represents the lowest litigation risk for the city. I'm sorry. Okay, it's probably the lowest litigation risk for the city. I know that the city thinks that the possibility that there might end up being too many businesses if they issue permits to everybody. But as you've heard from some of the other commenters tonight, you know, that may be a situation that's best left up to the marketplace. We know that there's a range of operations, and some people will be more successful than others. And so we may find that the market takes care of that selection process if you go ahead and issue a number of permits. I would want to make sure that you understand that we disagree to the extent that the number of permits issued is anything less than the original 3 selected applicants plus the appellants. This process is an attempt to remedy certain of the irregularities that existed in the original selection process, and so it is a remedy being fashioned on appeal for the benefit of those appellants. And so, and TMG's position is that the fairest solution there would be to issue, if you decide to take this option, the option would be to issue permits to all of the selected applicants plus all of the appellants who timely appealed. The question of the one appellant that did not appear at the July 16th hearing would be kind of a side issue, but at least the 3 appellants who appeared and the 3 selected applicants should be considered if the solution is to issue permits to all of the successful applicants. And with that, I'll reserve my right to comment further. We go down the path of discussing the new selection process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, and Regina, do we have anybody else online?
I see no hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, then we will go ahead and close the public comment on, oh, okay. Understood.
Hello, Kelly Chisana, representing Sacred Roots. I strongly urge everybody to reconsider. Obviously, we put a lot of time and effort into our application, into this whole process. I want to thank everybody that's done the continued effort on this. Dini has covered most of my points. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you guys, and you know, even just getting the meeting to be able to be in the format that it is. Please reconsider. We've done a lot already. Thank you.
Thank you.
We lost the chief. He must be. He's in the chat.
I'm sure he's not.
Hey guys, thanks for your service.
Good evening.
Martin of Reserve House.
You may want to get closer to the mic so they can hear you
Scott
upstairs.
Martin of Reserve House.
Thank you.
I wrote a small statement of my thoughts on this whole process. I saw and interpreted the ordinance was that it was designed to make sure the applicants were qualified to do the job, but more importantly, who would do the most for Placerville? Who would bring the most to the table for Placerville? I saw that there was a point system, but it did not say that the highest score would be the best for Placerville. I did not believe the application process was set up to give the licenses to the wealthiest applicant or the applicant with the lengthiest application. I believed it was designed to find the best applicant for Placerville. I believe the point system was designed to get the best qualified applicants to phase 4, the interview. We had a stellar interview in front of the advisory board and the city manager, Lee Morris. I believe that was why we were chosen to receive a license in Placerville, due to the interview, and due to what our vision for Placerville was. We were chosen to receive a license even though we scored lower than some of the other applicants. Mr. Morris saw something in Reserve House that inspired him to choose us. Unfortunately, the city council was not a part of this process. If they had been, perhaps they would support the decision of the city manager, the person they chose to make that decision. It seems that the council was fixated in the last meeting on the point system. I understand that it was an oversight to not give all the applicants a chance to better their scores. I am agreeable to the points we received being given to all the applicants that make it fair. After that, the city can still choose who is best for Placerville, regardless of who has the most points. I believe the application ordinance states several times that the city can deny anyone for any reason. I also believe we all had to sign a hold harmless paper, so no one could sue the city if they were unhappy with the decision. So I wonder, why are we here? Did someone's high-powered and influential friends put pressure on the city? I don't know. I do know that I love the city of ours. I do know how excited I am about our community benefits plan. I would be able to do what I love most of all, being a contribution to others. To me, it is the best thing about this life. At Reserve House, our plan was to get myself a crew, and we would go out into the community and repair the homes of the people most deserving in our community. I will be able to make a huge difference in so many people's lives. Our facility will also be, I believe it'll be one of the top tax producing businesses in the city due to our size, basically. And our diversity in licensing. We will be a powerhouse in the state with that licensing. We'll be one of the most licensed facilities in the whole state. I don't know if you realize that. All in our little town, without losing any of our charm or disrupting anyone in the local community. I am agreeable to more than 3 licenses and status what the council decides.
3 minutes.
The free market.
Yeah, you have to wrap up your comments. Thank you.
I'm Melanie Fisher from Reserve House, and there's a reason why city manager and selection committee chose us to be among the top 3 winners. It's because Reserve House will operate under a micro license. That means we will have an edibles kitchen, delivery service, and retail store, and it's going to create a lot of jobs. And at this time, thinking of all businesses that are shutting down, it's a really great time to open up a new business. The cannabis industry is exploding. Our Sacramento facility, we can't grow our products fast enough. And we also are partnered with branding company. We're going to ensure that it's a clean brand. We're going to have a clean reputation. And we're excited to create a company with really deep roots in Placerville and hire people and pay them very well. So thank you.
Thank you. One more. Okay. Done. Shucks.
clarify something? The email said we got 5 minutes per applicant. Is this because it's public comment that we're not getting 5?
Correct. Yeah, we haven't actually moved on to the, an actual resolution or a motion yet. This is just
So
on,
we do get
on
an
the,
opportunity to speak
yes,
later.
correct.
Okay. Well, then I'll just speak right now. Annie has a whole purpose. I'm prepared because she didn't get to speak at the last meeting, so I wanted to make sure to give her the time to speak tonight. I apologize. My name is Kimberly Carlisle from Chuck's Wellness.
Could you take your mask down?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Kimberly Carlisle from Chuck's Wellness, and Annie will be saying most of what we prepared tonight during our 5 minutes. But I just wanted to thank you for having us here tonight. This has been a long process that's cost us a lot of time. We put our life savings into this, and this means so much to us. Annie and I have dedicated our lives, our entire lives, to learning about medical cannabis and a variety of holistic therapies in order to help our community. And you have such an amazing opportunity to have us here to be able to provide excellent service to the community, as I actually have for the last 15 years. I am the only applicant who has run a dispensary for over 10 years, and City of Placerville residents have been coming to Sacramento for the last decade, and I've been helping them up here. And I just want you to know that it is a competition, but it's also what's important for the citizens of Placerville. That's why cannabis dispensaries are available. It's because of safe access. It's because education is needed, proper packaging, labeling. And we have extensive experience in this area. We're well regarded by any city council in any city. If you ask them where they send their friends and family, they will say to the dispensary that I run. And so I just want you to know that you have a great opportunity to have us here, and we look forward to serving Placerville if you let us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it? Oh. Okay, we'll go ahead then and close public comment on the motion for reconsideration. And bring it back to the council for further discussion.
I'd like to clarify one thing.
Yep.
A couple of the speakers alluded to that when we heard the repeal for the 3 folks, that that gave them a chance to change their submissions, and that wasn't true. It was based on everything that was done initially. So I think that should be brought forward because those folks were not allowed to. Am I right?
That's correct. When you did the mid-process appeals, no new information was allowed. It was a review of their existing application.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so with that, yeah, I think I'll call the question and call the vote. Roll call on the reconsideration motion.
Mayor Saragosa,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Acuna,
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes, and so we will now reconsider our original motion, which will allow us to look at these alternatives that staff has laid out for us as well, in addition to the initial item that Ms. Zambrano explained to us. So, Mr. Driscoll, I don't know if you want to, how we want to, give a little bit of background on the other portions here before we move forward.
I'm going to ask Ashley to give you that background.
Okay.
And thank you, everyone. So I don't want to belabor the issue. I know there's a lot of issues before you The staff report is certainly not exhaustive of all alternatives or proposals, as you know from much of the public comment that you just heard. The ones that we outlined, what I will say is that part of the reason that the staff report and those 3 alternatives are presented to the council in the way that they are is that our overarching recommendation is to ensure that there is a basis and a clear justification for how permits will be issued if your decision is to, instead of restarting the process, render a decision on permit issuance. And in addition to having a clear justification or foundation to explain the council's action, it's also important to remain internally consistent with the council's existing findings, which underlie each of the resolutions that you just adopted on the appeals. And so, as is stated probably too many times throughout the staff report, is that some of the key findings that the council has already made regarding the process was that there were certain irregularities and potential errors, both in the HDL initial scoring as well as the mid-procedure appeals. Now, beyond that, there's still some room, both from the evidence and testimony at the appeal hearings as well as the written testimony that was accepted as part of those appeals, to support some alternatives for how you issue permits. One of those would be, for example, declining to issue all 3 permits. That was discussed at the meeting, and one of the ways that could be found would be issuing a permit to just Sacred Roots. I will note that was actually the separate subject of a failed motion that occurred at the last meeting, but there are some independent reasons for finding that a permit should still issue to Sacred Roots, and that's detailed in the staff report. Alternatively, as some of the public comments have noted, you can consider simply upholding the city manager's original decision. Now, the important thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned before, is expressing the reasons and justification for finding the city manager's decision to nevertheless be upheld, while remaining consistent with your prior determinations on the process. One of the ways that we have determined supports and independently supports that type of decision is looking at the phase 3 selection process. As you know, the phase 3 selection process involved a separate independent selection committee that both scored the applicants and provided a recommendation. One of the reasons that the city manager's selection was the subject of multiple appeals is that the recommendation from phase 3 differed from the scoring of phase 3. And so that led to claims of arbitrary results. And so that's part of the reason that staff recommendation on alternatives 2 and 3 instead look at the phase 3 scoring, which the council did not find to be problematic and which has not been directly challenged in any of the appeals. That forms an independent separate basis for deciding that you have something of a ranked list of eligible and qualified applicants. Now, beyond that, there's also the issue of expanding the total number of permits. And so, for example, if you were to instead look at the phase 3 scoring and concurrently decide to expand the total number of permits issued, that could lead to results, for example, of issuing 5 or 7 permits, whatever pleases council, which would likely include all of the original selected applicants that the city manager selected anyway, in addition to some of the appellants. It really comes down to the council's decision and on how to form a basis for issuing those permits. And how many permits you think are appropriate for the city. There's certainly no obligation to issue all permits or an obligation to authorize additional permits, but those are options that are available that you can tie into, alternative 3. The one comment I will note that is in some of the written correspondence attached to the agenda and also is presented during the public comment just now is the proposal that permits be issued to the 3 original selected applicants and just the appellants. And part of the struggle with doing that, the reason that that is not proposed in the staff report is that there might be different and inconsistent reasons for why you would uphold the city manager's selection, but also issue permits to the appellants. And those reasons are not necessarily consistent with each other in terms of the evidence and testimony that you heard regarding why you would grant the appeals versus why you would uphold the original decision. And so we were really looking at separate and alternative ways to look at the evidence that's been presented and come up with an independent basis for how to issue permits, which we feel is consistent with the City Council's de novo review authority of the appeals. Hopefully I haven't lost any of you. I know it's a lot of information. There are a lot of issues. So, I'm available for further questions if you have any, and I'm not sure if Mr. Driscoll also has things to add.
One of the things, if I might, Council, is I'd like to add to Ashley's comments that I think the emphasis that she's placing on the phase 3 scoring is well founded. We do have a representative of the selection committee here who is available and can provide input to the council on their thought processes and their decision making. But I think that looking at what the selection committee did, it tends to, looking at that scoring, tends to cure a lot of the errors that were found and determined by the council to have existed, either HDL scoring or the mid-process appeals. You've got an equal footing, everybody's starting over, and you've got a criteria there that is reasonably objective. Sure, you're going to have some subjectivity to determine how many points you're giving somebody, but they use a criteria that's the same standards, if you will, that HDL did. So I think there's a lot of merit to the council putting emphasis on this phase 3 scoring. I think one of the comments made either in a letter or actually I think it was made tonight by the attorney for Sacred Roots as a good point. You can look at the mid-process appeals as really an opportunity to correct an error in the HDL scoring. And did it prejudice anybody? Was there a fundamental prejudice as a result of those mid-process appeals so that you need to throw out Reserve House and Chuck's? I would argue no, there wasn't. It simply let them proceed to the next phase and they had to compete on their own with everybody else. So I think there's good reasons to look at what the selection committee did and their scoring and place emphasis on that in making your decision.
Thank you, Mr. Driscoll. Yes.
And that makes
Councilmember
me
Borelli.
happy because when we had the meeting that we had before this one, when we talked about all this, that was one of the things, excuse me, things I said was I really wish that we had the committee there with us to tell us why the certain decisions were made, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it could have really been a big help. So
I think Mr. Torici is upstairs.
I saw him at the,
Yes, I was just going to say, before we take any actions or have discussions on any of these items here, I think the council would like to hear from Mr. Clerici about the context and why in the process that they went through to on their selections. So
Is he available this evening?
he is available this evening.
We're very fortunate. He's a very busy man across the state of California.
This is true.
Could I ask,
Lassen has lent him to us for the evening.
could I ask one more question?
Yes.
Please, I know, I think you told me in one of our conversations that you also placed emphasis on where the locations would be for the three that you chose. So just say that we decided to choose more. Would that location, I mean, we don't want a cluster or anything like that. So how would that work?
Well, I think it depends on how many you choose. I will say that we only had, I believe, a couple of applicants up on Broadway. We had the one on Upper Main, and all the others were down on,
Placerville Drive.
So, I think my issue when it originally was that we had 3 applicants. I felt it was important to spread those out, not have them all in a concentrated area. And that's part of my consideration was having one on Placerville Drive, one on Upper Main, and one on Broadway. I felt that was a good mix. So that was part of my consideration and the decision I made.
Well, I really wanted to highlight that because like you say, there were quite a few on Placerville Drive and I would hate to see.
A cluster.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing I'll just remind colleagues here as well is, and Ashley, I think, pointed it out, but I'll be a little bit more blunt about it, I guess, which is as we move forward with this and we hear from Mr. Clerici, we've made findings that we've all adopted unanimously that the HDL process is flawed in our deliberations. And so as we move forward, really the HDL process should be set aside and not used in any of our arguments in terms of how we come to a final decision. So just for everyone to remember that we've essentially set aside the HDL score. So as we move forward, it will be based on, as staff has recommended, say phase 3. So I just wanted to
I'm
put
thinking
that out
that I
there.
don't want to totally dismiss them because they looked into the background and everything of all these folks.
Well,
it was an important thing.
They did, but we've made we've made findings that their scoring was flawed, and so so we wouldn't be able to use their scoring as a basis to go forward. So, but with that, we have our committee here or a committee member, Mr. Clerici. Oh,
may I just follow up on the conversation the council was having?
Yes.
Whatever you do, however many applicants you do, assuming you select certain applicants, they will be revetted because of the amount of time that has gone by. So there'll be, refreshed background checks to make sure that there's something that, hasn't come up which would disqualify them. There may be location changes. Those will have to see if they fit within the purview and the restrictions set forth in our ordinance. There could be management changes. Those same things will apply.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Hi, John.
Howdy.
Now the other John.
Hi there. John Clerici, member of your cannabis committee. I have a question for you. I put together like a 3-page thing. Did you finally get a chance to see it? You have not seen it. Okay, that's fine. Whatever. Okay, thank you very much. I'll just distill this down as quickly as possible. But I will give you some background.
John, there's not a time limit on this one, so.
Yeah, I understand that, but I want to go home, so, and there's people up there and they're anxious and they want a resolution, and so I don't need to go on. To give you a little bit of background, I have led many lives, and in many of my lives, I have interviewed lots of people that have gone through a process similar to this one, and I have been a part of processes like this one in my professional life as a consultant. You get an RFP or an RFQ, you put in an application, you may be part of a team, there's a written portion, there's a verbal portion, and you go through this thing. And there's always a winner and a loser. And the loser always thinks that they got screwed, and the winner thinks, thank you very much, let's go do some work. In this process, the committee we're the only people that actually saw all the applications and interviewed all the teams. I would like to just address this notion of HDL very quickly. I don't think that their scoring was like grossly done or bad. I think there were just some nuances in it. If you have a couple of people looking at it, even with great processes, you may come up with slightly different point structures. Personally, I was pleased that the 2 groups that originally didn't make the cut finally got a chance to interview. Because to me, the written application was just to make sure that you could fill out a form, get it to us on time, and we know that could be a challenge for some people. And fill it all out and do the requisite things and be competent. And that's what a resume is. How many times have we interviewed somebody based on their resume, and then we interview them and go, oh my God, I would never hire this person on a bet. Because when you actually sit down and talk to them, you go, Conversely, you may get a resume that doesn't look great, but when you sit down and talk to people, you go, wow, their actual abilities, their capabilities comes through in the interview, and it isn't necessarily reflected in the application. The other thing about the scoring process for the committee itself, if someone had asked me in advance, I would not have used the scoring method that we did, because it was basically you put points into a computer and then you had to press yes, and then it got sent off somewhere. And the challenge with that is, as was mentioned before, we interview people over multiple days. And the idea that the 99 on one day is exactly the same as a 99 on the next day, it might be more an issue of art and luck than actual what you were looking at. When I interview teams, when I've interviewed teams under other circumstances, I used to use the stacking method. So you'd have their resume or you'd have their thing, and I would go, the first one comes in, of course, the first one's on the top because they're the only one you talk to. Then you get the next one and you go, oh, I like them a little better than, and you stack. I would have preferred to do that because I think my scoring probably reflects, I'm hoping it does, because I hope that I didn't practice cognitive dissonance. I believe that my scoring probably reflects what we recommended to the city manager. Other scores didn't, and that's why there's this disparity in the scoring. I would spend less time worrying about the scoring and more along the lines of what we did. So let's get into that. And this thing that some of you may have seen and some of you didn't. The written interviews, or the interviews, to me, revealed a lot. We had road questions. Everyone got asked the same questions, but also everybody had a chance, because in an interview, they might say something. You go, oh, well, that's interesting. What about that? Give us a little bit more. And they might elaborate on that. One of the things that was clear to us after going through all the interviews is some people had taken a more proactive approach to the interview, and some had not. And it showed. The ones that didn't, you'd ask a question, you answer a question. Time management kind of was weird. You didn't get through everything the way you wanted to. It didn't leave a good impression. Now, we thought everybody that interviewed was actually pretty okay. We even said so in public. We said, all these people appear qualified. But the three that we selected were selected for a reason. And that's kind of what I'm here to chat with you about. And you may have some questions. And that is, when we went through the interview process, the three that we finally selected were the ones who not only answered the questions, but there was extra. And not extra information like, like something that, but there was something extra about it. The way they approached it, their passion, their pride, the way they were doing it, the way they connected to us and our community. And there were the three that stood out. Now, not surprisingly, two of these entities, one of them actually runs a business in town, and the other one runs a business 2.5 miles away. And those two people were born in this part of the world. One of them went to El Dorado High School. I think one of them went to school with my daughter. They are from here, and they knew that. They didn't take it for granted, but they knew it. So when they came into the interview, they nailed it. And the third person, they bought a building in town, which was a huge risk, because they risked not getting, they could have had an empty diner with, all dressed up and no place to go. That's a risk they took. But I'll tell you right now, and I think you see a little of that when they come in here and talk. Those people have fire and commitment and passion. So by the time we were done, we said, all these people could probably sell weed in town and be fine. But these three were the best. I still think they're the best. I actually listened to the entire appeals thing, all 6 hours or so of it, and I've been here for this. And I am not wavering from that commitment. You have the three best picks in front of you. They were in his recommendation. You can mix the bag up and pull out some others. They will not be the three best, in my humble opinion. I don't believe you should expand the number of perms. That's certainly something that's up to you folks. But you may recall, we actually went through a lot of talk and process and anxiety and angst about the three, coming up with that three. And if I recall, one of you only wanted to have two. And so, you know, this idea of, well, all of a sudden now we can just start, you know, let's just start handling these things out. And then I love it. It's like, well, then the market will decide. Well, the market's going to decide anyway. These three people might go out of business tomorrow. And that'll be the market deciding. And then someone else might be able to do their jobs. But we came up with three for a reason. And if you're going to just like kind of throw that out, then you better have some good reasons for throwing it out. And it, you know, might be more than just who's going to litigate this thing. You know, it was objective and subjective, and that's what interviews are. That's why you have an interview. And that's why when we were done, and we talked about this a lot too. We deliberated for a long time. And, you know, people would say, well, what about this one? What about that one? And we would talk about the virtues, the pluses, the minuses. And at the end of the day, we came up with those three. It's dinner time and my blood sugar's getting a little low, so I'm really starting to kind of get out here a little bit. But let's see. Yeah, that's it. I don't think I've probably given you much solace, but like I said, I've sat through all of this now, and I'm still committed to those three. I think they're the best ones. I think they'll be the best ones tomorrow. I think if you guys decide to give out 3 permits and you give it to them, you will be making the best decision. And if you decide to do something different, that will not be the best decision. Now, will it work? Maybe it will work, but will it be the best? No. And it does represent a certain sort of symmetry in town. And I think that they'll do fine, my own personal opinion. Let's see. Do you have any questions? Really?
Questions?
John, thank you, first of all, for the time you put into this.
Yeah.
And I think it would benefit everybody if you would remind us who served with you
Oh,
on.
right. Well, gosh, now I get to call him Chief Red. Excellent choice, by the way. Chief Red, Councilmember Taylor, and Pierre Rivas. So, you know, people that know the town, people that know business, people that run a brick and mortar business, people that understand how this thing goes, folks that have been around here. I've lived in Placerville 40 years. Yeah, I know, a long time. You know, there was always going to be a fourth team. That's the reality of it. If you stick with 3 permits, there's always going to be a fourth team. I don't know what you do. Once again, don't go crazy with the source. We considered it everything. Written stuff, verbal stuff, how they presented themselves, what we thought about it, and we deliberated a long time before we came up with this. And I think the best decision is to go with what your city manager told you in January, whatever that was, February, March, April, whatever that was. It was before COVID, I know that. I think that would be your best choice.
Vice Mayor?
First off, I want to thank the committee for, I don't know that we've ever, I don't know if we can actually properly thank you, but I want to thank you nonetheless for, and all the committee members for all the effort they put in. Sometimes we ask a lot of committees and we sit up here and second guess them, and sometimes that's our job, and sometimes we do that for good reasons, and sometimes we should follow committee. And so I have a couple questions for you. Was it a unanimous vote among the committee members to select these 3 applicants?
Yes. Yes. We deliberated, and everybody, some people, it was fairly consistent amongst all of us, but there were a few that we kind of said, well, what about, Acme widgets over here? What about them? And then we would discuss it, and we compared them to the 3, or the ones that we had on the table. So, but by the time we were done, we were all nodding up and down and saying, yeah, we were very comfortable. I mean, I don't want to speak for the chief back here, but we were comfortable with our decision. And yes, it was unanimous.
And how much time would you say you spend deliberating?
Well, hours. It was like, we came in, well, we had been chatting about it. As this thing went on, you kind of talk and go, okay. I mean, there were a few, I have to be honest with you, there were a couple of teams, God bless them. They were just not ready for prime time. I mean, they may be great doing this, but when they came and talked to us, it was like, we don't want those people anywhere near Placerville. Mostly because they weren't, I don't know, they came off as disorganized and kind of scattered or something, I mean, they just didn't, they didn't get to all the questions. I mean, they literally just started talking and they couldn't. So there's only a couple of them that we said, But during the process, we were always talking about this. Well, that was really great. How did they compare to this one? And we go, yeah, they were good, but this one was still better, But at the end, I think we met for hours, 2 or 3 hours. And then we talked to the city manager.
With all the information you have.
With all the information, yeah. But you have to remember, we did this for, well, there were 11, 10 interviews, 10, 11, 9, 10, however many interviews there were. So we spent days talking about this. And the actual deliberations themselves were a couple, 3 hours.
And thank you for that.
Councilmember
John,
Burley.
you said, you made it very clear, forget the scores, but did you guys pay any attention to the scores when you first started out?
Well, like the scores from HDL?
Well, what you said to us is forget the scores. So, but the scores were important how much when you were first,
Well, you mean it went during our deliberations?
well, weren't you presented with a score sheet from HDO and,
I don't remember, no.
not at all? So you didn't say any numbers?
No. That's good. I mean, I had been keeping a tally of what I had done. So I knew who my top 5, I knew them ranked all the way to last, but we didn't know. We said,
Okay.
who were the best? And I mean, I know they're upstairs, or one of them's upstairs. Kelly and Summer were by far the top. There wasn't even a question. When we said, it was literally not who's first, it's who's second and third. That's literally what it came down to, because they were so far up there. Their written application was as good as any of them, and then their interview was out of the box. It was what we expected.
But you said that you guys had a scoring sheet too that you didn't really approve of.
Well, no, that was my own personal feeling. They were done on tablets.
Okay.
And so you could score them. There were these, I don't want to get into the details of scoring.
No, I'm just wondering, and so then, I guess, Cleve, you put them all together? Is that how the process works?
We actually, HDL oversaw that phase 3 scoring. And so they took the scores from the interviewers, which was done on an electronic tablet. When you said tablet, it was an electronic tablet. They entered their scores in. HDL went back, totaled the scores, and added them to the original scores and gave them all.
For clarity, you're saying you had a challenge with how you entered it into the tablet in terms of, but you're not saying that the scoring was a problematic.
No.
Okay, because there's.
It would have been, if someone had asked me, it would not have been my preferred way to do it, because the challenge when you do that is, you literally, I forget, I think it was, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. Element 7 was like one of the very first ones we interviewed. Well, I don't know if you folks have done a lot of interviewing where you do a score sheet like state, processes and stuff. There's a tendency to, like, the very first person that walks in the room gets 1 million points. And then you're always dealing with that. It's like, well, the first person got 1 million, but I really like the second person better, so I have to give them 1,000,001. And so it was a finite number of points. It was like, it was a lot. There were a lot of points. Some of the questions had like 100 points attached to them. Some had 300 points attached to them. I don't know. I don't even know what it totaled up to. But it becomes like scoring, almost like a scoring bias, because the first person that walks in the room, you haven't interviewed anybody else, so unless they really screwed things up, they seem like the smartest people you've ever met. And then you then have to think, well, the next person was better, or the next person was worse. So you want to make sure, well, I want to score them below that, you know, and then we did not have access to the scores. So, but once again,
At the end of the day, you felt like you came, you know, knowing all of that,
yeah,
and knowing that you had those challenges, you feel that you came up with the best.
yes,
Okay.
yes, still at the end of the day, yeah, we had the best one, the best three.
Okay.
I can tell you, I mean, I could go on about why we thought we were the
No,
best
it's
three,
okay.
but I think I made it clear.
Your blood sugar, remember your blood sugar.
Well, you know,
I think it's important that, Mr. Clarici has clarified for us that your team did not see the HDL numbers.
no,
You did each interview
Right.
blind, if you will,
yeah,
and
Yeah, 'cause
came up with these
yeah.
results.
yeah,
And they had the deliberation
we
period.
had a deliberation.
It went beyond, and I can see where you would feel like you put your laptop in for the day, and then you're going, oh geez, I wish I could have changed 5
Yeah,
minutes. But at the end, you spent almost 3 hours
right,
going over everything and came up with this list.
well, yeah, yes, yes, that's why I like the stacking method.
Yeah.
The stacking method is better for me, because then
No, it makes sense.
I can move them around, and then at the end, the one you want is at the top, and you're always testing yourself. The problem is when you press send, it goes into the computer, and that's, I actually wrote mine down, I don't know if the other folks did, of course, Joe did. Cheap. But, you know, I actually kept track, but I'm not so sure the other people, when they did their scores, you know. And once again, when we deliberated, we put all that aside. We said, who are the 3 best for this town? Who are the 3 best for this community? Who showed the best in the interview? And it was the 3 that we told you. Otherwise, we would have given you 3 best. We would have said they were the best, but they were the best.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Clarici. Okay. So now we have some context from the review committee. Mr. Morris, I don't know if you want to add anything else, because certainly I think that's part of this discussion as well, is when you made your final picks. I'm sure it might be some repetition, but I would actually like to hear your final analysis as well.
Well, I wanna tell you that I think you selected an excellent committee to do this review. I support them 100%, as you know, I work with all of them in one way or another, I have. And, so I really trusted their input. I will tell you that they gave me a recommendation. I quizzed them, I asked them why I wanted them to justify it, because I you know, saw what they were doing. And I wanted to know why they felt that way, and I felt comfortable going with it, after I talked to them, going with their recommendation. I did not interview every one. I will tell you that. The top applicant, I did not interview. I went with the recommendation of that committee. And, you know, what I saw going through the whole process. So, again, I'll go back to, I relied on them. I didn't go to that next step of interviewing all of them. I didn't feel it was necessary. I thought we'd had a thorough process at that point, and that they had done a good job of interviewing, and I trusted their input and what they did. And the way it came out, fit with what I wanted to see. That wasn't what I didn't tell them really going into it, with wanting to spread them into the 3 different business areas. I felt it worked that way, so it made a lot of sense to me that way. So that's what I made my decision.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Okay. So, discussion.
I'm concerned about, for the sake of everyone's time and what they have invested in this, that we keep it, how can I say this? Keep the conversation focused on what we are intending to do. And would it make sense to make a motion right now, Mr. Driscoll? You're giving me a look, and I think it's a good one. To focus in, so we don't, because I don't want to have people coming in here and say, well, pick me, pick me, pick me, because that's not the purpose of what we're doing this evening.
Right. Well, and I think,
I'm not sure I'm explaining, but
well, I think
well,
We reopened the process.
right. So we're sort of tabula rasa. I mean,
so
we have a,
if we were to adopt the findings of the cannabis ad hoc committee,
The selection committee?
yeah,
Right.
the selection,
True. Okay.
that would be the focus of the motion.
But we're kind of,
And
okay,
then
so are
how
you,
do you
are we doing like an interview of
I
these
don't wanna
folks
get-
again?
no,
That's
no.
what I'm,
Yeah, no.
exactly.
And I don't want to have, and I mean, the applicants, I guess, would be entitled to it, but I don't want everybody coming in here and explaining to us for 3 minutes or 5 minutes why they're better than
Well,
what's
that's what they're
been
gonna do.
presented
because
to us.
Well, what do you want them?
But that's what they're gonna do.
I'm not sure, Mr. Vice Mayor. I'm just trying to be
No, I understand. I'm trying to understand.
You know,
So if we make a motion and then we ask for comment, and they comment and if the motion fails to reach a vote, are we gonna go through the process and do another motion and another comment period? I mean, just for,
I'm kinda not in
May I make
favor.
a suggestion? Please, maybe you should, so that you don't have to go through it with each time you make a motion, you go through a series of motions, you ask the people who want to comment on the alternatives and what, you know, either the alternatives that are set forth in the staff report or what they think you should do. Now, you've heard some of that already in the comments you've received, but I think that the topic of where do you go from here? What process do you use? One of the alternatives outlined in the staff report or something else? I think you can ask for public comment on that, and that should cover wherever your motion goes.
there we go. So it would be on the 3 options that staff has presented to us.
Correct. And then, well, yes.
If it could be somebody that absolutely loves number 2.
Then after that, you can close public comment, have your discussion, and make whatever motion you feel are appropriate.
I knew you had the information I needed. Thank you, and that's,
Yeah.
thank you, Vice Mayor. That was kind of my concern.
And clarification on that, Mr. Driscoll, so let's say we get to a point where we're gonna make a motion. Would I open up public comment again on that motion since it wasn't necessary?
No.
So it would just be now?
The public
Okay.
comment is now on what direction you should
Yeah.
go back.
Okay.
so is there any,
That makes,
Yeah, so I guess before I call for public, comments on that, is there any other discussion that council wants to do prior to, opening up public discussion, or any questions for staff, or the committee?
I quite frankly don't think we're going to hear anything different.
no.
It's all going to be the same, and I think we need to make a decision on how we're going to, what are we gonna base it on? I mean, you know,
Right.
we're still in the same,
That's discussion. We should stick with questions at this point, till we've had the public comment.
Correct.
so what questions
On
do
the
you wanna
3,
ask?
well, we're asking for public comment.
Yeah, so the public comment,
That staff has presented.
right, so it would be,
Or the entire staff report, any part of the staff report.
that's correct, because we could always go back to the original,
right,
Staff.
the 13, so you have,
right now, we're working on, so based on my comments that got us started here, I asked that we
look at the alternative. Yeah.
put a motion for reconsideration, and that's what we're doing right now.
That's right, yes, so we're on to page 3.
Yeah, we're on to page 3 and 4.
3 and 4, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it would be the 3 alternatives.
Right, so it'd be alternative 1 is, issue only 1 permit.
If I might, it wouldn't necessarily just be the 3 alternatives. Somebody out there may have what they think is a better idea.
Correct.
Mhm.
Oh,
So it could be, I'm saying generally, what direction to go, whether it's the alternatives outlined in the staff report, what you did on July 16th, or something totally different.
Correct. Correct. And I'll
So it's
just,
pretty much just wide open, and let's discuss it all, is that what you're saying?
yeah,
And then you can close the public comment and have your own discussion, deliberation, and make however many motions you need to make to get something done.
It would be appropriate to do 3-minute comments or 5-minute comments?
well, we did tell people 5,
We did tell people 5.
Okay.
so I think we're locked in on 5
For the applicant,
Correct.
for the
and
applicant.
for
The
public
appellant.
at large, it'd be 3.
so, okay, so here, we've heard this several times tonight.
They don't need to use all 5 minutes.
Yeah, they're not, yes.
They're recommending, a lot of them would like to see us issue more than 3 permits. So tonight, when they come in, I would just like them to address themselves, you know, and not,
Well, I don't think you, and
Yeah, I don't
you
think we
can't
can-
control what they say.
Okay, but I know
We
what
can
they,
ask, I guess.
right, they don't, I mean,
They're upstairs.
well, I know, I know,
The comments really relate to weighing the merits of their particular application all over again. It should
Right.
be, what's gonna be the fair and proper process?
proper process.
Yeah.
That's one of the alternatives to this.
Okay.
Or an alternate,
Or,
Yeah.
or an additional.
Because we know they've all met a minimum threshold, so
Exactly.
now it's a matter
I
of
just-
what the process is
we've
gonna
heard
be.
a lot.
And what they think about the, I guess it relates to the phase 3 scoring and how that would all line up.
Yeah, again, because we're not going to contemplate whatever we do, it's not going to be based on the HDL numbers. So if somebody wants to come in and say that, they certainly can, they're entitled to, but it won't be ultimately what we make our findings on. All right, so with that then, I think we're in agreement. We'll go ahead and open up public comments then.
Did we invite the
Regina?
applicants to speak first? Let's do that.
Yes, that's true. We'll go ahead and have the applicant speak first.
Joe?
Is that one?
Thank you, Councilmember Acuna. Yeah.
Kind of keep it in a normal process.
Hi, council, staff. Kelly Chisano, representing Sacred Roots. I would, Mike, if it's possible, to allow my 5 minutes to Xenia, my attorney, who was not able to attend today.
Absolutely.
I think she
On.
raised her hand around, so we can, however she fits in, again, thank you.
Yep, Regina, if you want to.
I think what we, in order to maybe make this work, Mayor, if we have the applicants that are here speak first, and then those that are online will.
Sure.
That's great with me, thank you. Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
that works. Holding a matter.
Hello, Melanie Fisher here with Reserve House. Just wanted to say, let's all choose progress and common sense. Kindly give us the licenses we already won. Allow us to show that our hearts are open, our doors are open, and our bank accounts are open, and we are more than ready to get this going and help the city of Placerville. So that's.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here. I'm Annie Aubrey with Chex Wellness. We are happy to see that out of the options presented, only a restart of the process does not allow us to move forward. We are finding restarting this process to be devastating and ask you to please consider all other options but this one. If this ends up being your decision, though, we ask that no permits be granted until the process is complete. While this does not discount Sacred Roots in any way, permitting even one company gives them a monopoly and an unfair advantage in the market. Given that each applicant continues to work and give to this process, these decisions would continue to hurt our chances of success. This process has been a long and bumpy road, and we'd like to see a fair shot and a light at the end of the tunnel after all that has been given. Mr. Morris has led the city with integrity for almost a decade now. He makes all the decisions with the city's best interests at heart, just as he made with this one. You've trusted him to do his job on so many issues. Why not this one? The city manager chose the top 3 for a reason, and the interview panel scored us very highly for a reason too. The way we see it is that Sacred Roots should have been chosen. Kelly has been a staple in this community and highly involved with this whole process and in the bringing of regulated cannabis to the state. He deserves a license. We were chosen because of the educational, medicinal, and holistic services we provide are unique amongst the other applicants. Also unique, we are a local, women-led company. There is no other applicant that has operated as long as we have. We are dedicated to restoring a long deserted and beloved building. We are holistic wellness practitioners that have been in service for our entire life. We too have been a staple for all meetings in person regarding cannabis long before the ordinance was completed. We stand alone in our mission to serve the sick, have a different demographic than all other applicants, and are proposing a very unique experience in a 1950s style setting. We believe Reserve House was chosen in part because they too offer something unique. They are the largest business applying by far. They will offer 5 businesses requiring local employment, additional businesses revenue that isn't solely storefront. They have the ability to bring the most to the city in tax revenue. All of us are strong and unique contenders, diversifying the market, spread across the community, and we are all committed to our community indefinitely. The city manager and interview panel all saw this when giving their recommendations. As you'll see, the 3 of us are the ones that showed up today in person, just as we always have and always will. We believe you should be choosing who you want in your city, and you have every right to award the permits to the chosen already through the complete process. So please, no matter what option you choose, you should honor the decision, dedication, and work that went into the city manager's original recommendation, and award the 3 CVPs to the original winners tonight, because we were all chosen for a reason. Please know, this is my life's work. This is going to get the love and dedication of my full attention, and not be spread across several businesses in different cities and states under one management structure that may not always benefit a small town. We will always continue to be a unique, quality, and community-based business, no matter how the economy or cannabis shifts. Not having us in the community is a disservice to all those who need our help, a disservice to our neighborhood and our building in much need of restoration and more foot traffic, a disservice to you to not open businesses that can provide solid revenue right away during an unemployment and tax crisis. When we lose money on this project, it's our personal hard-earned money. It's our life savings, not some Canadian investment, and it will take years to recover if I even could. We don't have any duplicate applications out in any other city like most applicants do. My sole focus is here because this is my home. Given the opportunity, I am confident Chuck is a business you can be proud to represent our town. We hope you have the same trust in us as the interview panel and the city manager did to serve you and our community in the highest standard of care possible. We hope you keep the original ruling, knowing the due diligence over the last 2 years was thorough, and request that you please not restart a process that has already been done. You know us all very well at this point, and know we were chosen because we offer something very special and valued that our community needs. I will close with asking you this: who will you be most proud to represent our town? Who will you send your mother, brother, or partner to should they be in pain or ill? The city manager's suggestions reflect the best choice for our town. HDL is here to advise that the applicants are qualified, but you are here to choose who represents Placerville. We hope at the very least you choose to trust and honor your city manager and interview panel's decision, and move us forward tonight in representing our community. Thank you for your time and all you do.
Good evening, members of the council. Again, Blair Will, representing TMG. The 2 alternatives that I'm hearing most discussed in your prior conversation involves upholding and affirming the city manager's initial selections and the possibility of proceeding with issuing permit based upon phase 3 scoring only. I suggest to you that either one of those is probably not a good idea. With all due respect, the council has already made the finding that the process was unfair and had irregularities. And so I think that precludes the option of just upholding the original selections. I think your outside counsel has already advised you that you need to maintain some internal consistency with regard to your findings. And so I don't see how you can achieve that if you've already recognized the process was unfair. So that will be my comment with regard to the alternative number 1. With respect to the phase 3 scores, again, I know internal consistency is a problem here because well, for example, the applicants who made it to phase 3 were vetted through phase 1 and phase 2, and they had to meet certain criteria in phase 1 and phase 2 to even proceed to phase 3. So those phases are not independently separatable in terms of making one part of it a viable process. In hindsight, which, you know, so the HDL scores, yes, well, maybe they were separate, maybe they weren't, but the point is that the applicants who made it to phase 3 had already been vetted through phase 1 and phase 2. So specifically, for example, Chuck's and Reserve House wouldn't even have participated in phase 3, but for the phase 1 and phase 2 process. I must say, with all due respect to Mr. Clarici, in his comments to you earlier tonight, he used phrases like something extra and fire and passion, and I suggest to you that those are subjective criteria. That process was subjective, it wasn't objective, and I raise those issues because TMG, with regard to the phase 3 scoring, in fact, in our appeal, we did raise the issue of whether the phase 3 scoring was arbitrary, and we said that it was. So in our appeal, in our item number 5, we brought that issue up. So twice now I've heard council mention that nobody challenged phase 3 scoring. That's simply incorrect. Mr. Clarici also further mentioned that he had his top 5 in mind before he even started the phase 3 interviews.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, well, I'm sorry if I misheard that. I thought that he said he had his top 5 in mind. But in any case, he mentioned words like local and things like that. These are very subjective and arbitrary phrases. As you know, the principal in TMG is Eddie Delfino. He's lived here his whole life. He's as local as anybody gets. But we would suggest that should be part of the process by which you decide who's going to be a successful applicant and who's not. And so again, I think, you know, you have the opportunity to create a remedy for some of the issues raised by the appellants. And frankly, I think that those 2 remedies that are available are issuing permits to all the successful applicants and the appellants, or restarting the whole process over again. And so those are my comments. Again, Blair with TMG, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you're in a difficult position.
Thank you. How many? Is there anybody else? Probably phone after this. Okay, so that's, we'll go ahead and move to the callers, starting with, I think, Sacred Roots Council.
Xenia, go ahead.
Good evening again, and I'm not going to repeat what I put in my letter or what I said earlier, but clearly I think what Mr. Clarici said is exactly the point I was trying to make throughout this process, and that is that you can find that the HDL scoring was flawed. You can find that the HDL allowing the correction of a mistake was inappropriate, and you can still respect the decision made by the committee and the city manager, because there's nothing in the ordinance nor in the procedures that were adopted in order to carry out the intent of the ordinance. There's nothing in any of those provisions which preclude the city manager from inquiring or gathering more information. As a matter of fact, it allows the city manager to get more information from any applicant at any time. So the notion that these irregularities should take the decision-making power away from the committee and the city manager don't really follow suit. So the council would be perfectly justified, especially after hearing Mr. Calerigi. I mean, that was just really important information, I believe. And it was something that I assumed but did not have the evidence of. But now we know the basis of the decision. We know that there's nothing in the ordinance or the provisions that would disallow the committee from considering things other than what the HDL score was, and can throw out the HDL score and they're still going to come to the same conclusion. So I think that the alternative of accepting the recommendation from your city manager is the best alternative. Secondarily, I think alternative number one that is put forth by the staff is a good alternative. And then thirdly, the third alternative I think also could be appropriate. I think what's not appropriate is, well, I shouldn't say appropriate, that's the wrong word, but I would urge the committee or the council not to adopt a resolution which allows for all of the applicants to get a permit, because I don't believe that the city manager or the selection committee is on board with that. And I think that the statements of Mr. Calerigi demonstrate that not all these applicants should be allowed to operate within Placerville, the city of Placerville. I mean, it's an important decision that this council has made in allowing to have these types of stores in their city. And I think that it was a well-reasoned, well-founded decision made to permit only 3. That was based on what was known at the time and what is known now as far as what the city can support and what would be supportive to the city. And therefore, I would urge the council to either adopt the provision of alternative 1, 3, or just accepting the city manager's decision in total. Thank you very much again for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.
Patrick Goggin, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and City Council members, for another opportunity to speak to you. I really don't want to belabor the points. I think, Mr. Will made some good points, and I think others have been articulated. Patrick Goggin, Canatopia, which is an applicant and an appellant that was a selected first alternate, an appellant that tied in all of the scoring, including the phase 3, including the interviews, tied for 3rd. At the end of the day, it would be ultimately fundamentally unfair, given this is an appeals process, for Canatopia not to be part of this the selection that you decide tonight. We urge you strongly to consider alternative 3. This is the first time that we've heard and articulated reason and justification for the ultimate selection. That has not been presented to us up until this point. When the city manager made his selection, he did so without any explanation. So it's just now that we're getting this information. And while we appreciate all that went into this very difficult decision, we didn't have the due process of knowing why that discretion was employed. It's my understanding that 5 cannabis business permits have already been authorized by the city council. The city council has discretion to go beyond that if it wants, but you're already authorized to issue 5 permits tonight. It would be fundamentally unfair considering all of the evidence that's been presented, all of the testimony that's been heard by Canatopia in this appeal, to not have them included in your final decision. Again, they were a top selected alternate, meaning in the, at least under the top three, perhaps the fourth position. They tied for third in all the scoring, and all of the, if you look at this holistically, to not include Canatopia in your final decision would be fundamentally unfair and not serving the interests of Placerville. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just jump in real fast. I don't usually make comments after comments here, but we are operating under 3 licenses. Previous council did vote for only 3 licenses, and so if that were to change, we'd have to make return to that original motion and do something different. So 3 is the number.
Okay, we'll hear from Chris Hester.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Hester. I represent One Plant. I apologize, I wasn't able to speak earlier, and I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. We had originally spoke to the city attorney regarding our appeal process, and he instructed us that we did not actually have to present a case, and we thought that given the circumstances and being through this multiple times, you know, the winners, when they're appealing, are always fighting for themselves. They won, and the losers are, you know, trying to point out reasons of, you know, why it was unfair. One of the things that I would like to say is that when we're going through this process in every city, like, we understand that this is a moving target for cities and that it is a really difficult process. And you have outside counsel helping you. And oftentimes a company like HDL, they're being paid a certain amount of fees and they believe in their structure being right, but it can oftentimes be cumbersome. And when you try to incorporate a very objective process with partially subjective processes, this is kind of what ends up happening. So you did have one of your committee members earlier say that they didn't look at the scores that were presented by HDL, and that maybe, you know, he's been there for 40 years and possibly, I believe he said that his daughter or his son were friends with one of the applicants too. I would point out that you guys created an objective process and that there was a certain amount of subjectiveness applied to it, and then the outcome is what we have now. I would also say that when we go into a city and we look at it from an application standpoint, that a lot of thought goes in on whether or not we want to apply. And so we spend, you know, $50,000, $100,000 going through a process that we think is very clear, and we've done this in several cities with HDL. And we think that there's a certain amount of certainty that there might be a fair shot in that. And in this instance, I don't think that that was the case. And I think that it was actually reinforced earlier when he was speaking about the subjectiveness that it was applied to it, where we thought we were paying for an objective process. Again, you know, I'm not here to talk about any of the other groups. That's not the purpose of this. I think everyone was probably qualified enough to operate in your city. Whether or not it was the best fit for Placerville, you know, that's up to you guys. But what I know when I paid for the application is I thought I was getting A, B, and C on the way that it was presented and graded. And I don't think that that's what happened here. You know, at the end of the day, this is your guys' decisions, but there should be a certain amount of representation that says, hey, we're the city of Placerville, here's the rules, here's how it's gonna go down. And then if it bifurcates from that, then what do you do? And that's really what you're deciding on. What process that you guys came up with, is that actually what happened, or did something else happen? And again, like I say, I understand that this is a moving target and it's really difficult to understand and it's really hard to determine, but really that's what this is about, was what you guys proposed on what we were applying for, did that actually happen? Anyway, I really appreciate your guys' time. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. Again, have a great night. Thank you.
Mr. Hester, I just have one question for you. Just for clarification for the council, is One Plant Placerville, you were under a different name before during this process?
No, it's well, actually, I'm sorry. So it's 3 Habitat Consulting, and then
Okay.
one we're DBA'd One Plant Placerville.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Last call for public comment. This is from, we have Josh Black again. He hasn't spoken yet on this portion, so go ahead, Josh.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members and city staff. Yeah, I just want to speak really quickly and encourage you as you make the decision tonight to really focus on the scores. And the facts are that, you know, in the phase 2 HDL component, which I know there's talk of discarding, element 7 scored second behind Sacred Roots in that process. In the interview, we scored 4th behind Sacred Roots, Chucks, and One Plant. And that gave us a combined score of 2nd, with those 2 scores taken into account. If you discard the HDL score, we came 4th. But when the city manager decided to release his final rankings, we came 7th. We got a 2nd, a 4th, and then moved to a 7th, which has been our issue all along. We felt that score just wasn't right. Incidentally, we beat Reserve House on both the HDL and the interview. So we're slightly confused as to why they were awarded a permit above us when we consistently outscored them throughout the entire process. So, you know, that's what I would encourage you to take into account tonight is you know, if you're going to focus on any scores, focus on the scores. The facts are element 7 scored 2nd after the HDL interview and the interview. And then we scored 7th when it came to the city manager's choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I see no further comments, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Regina. We're going to go ahead then and close the public comment portion.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry. We do have a comment from Rick. He just raised his hand. He might have been delayed. Do you want to allow him to speak?
Yes. Okay,
go ahead, Rick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I appreciate that. I was stalled for a minute there. I won't go long. All the applicants were qualified. I say that alternative 3 of issuing more permits, especially after hearing your committee members speak about the process, it just didn't seem fair. I believe he actually said that one of them took a risk and bought a building, which made them high on their list. Our landlord owns a plaza that he kept a building vacant for now, I think 18 months or longer, waiting for this process. So we all took a lot of risks, but to say that they bought a building and a risk and my kids went to school with them, I've lived here for 40 years, I just don't think it was a fair process. I think that kind of solidifies there's only one direction to go. Whether or not the scoring, I have not seen the scoring. I think we scored 6th or 7th, and we were a little bit lower down the list. We have, you know, all the applicants are going to bring, any applicant that you choose is going to bring the necessary processes to Placerville. We endear Placerville in our hearts and every other city that we go into. Because I got a lot of friends in Placerville, but because I don't live in Placerville, shouldn't rule us out of being in the running of being a qualified applicant. because I believe our application will stand up against anybody's application with our experience and what we have built in the cities where we operate now, which would just bring more to Placerville. You know, our experience is just, you know, it's right up there with anybody's. So with that said, I just want to say option 3 of giving more, it looked like it was very subjective. We invested a lot of money into this, and to hear that the city manager made a decision just without even looking at the applications. Thank you for your time again.
Thank you.
What did he represent?
Tranquil Meadows.
Oh.
Yes.
Franklin Meadows?
Yeah. Tranquil Meadows. Yes.
Thank you. Oh, yes.
Okay,
There's
Regina,
no, yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor, there are no further public comments.
Okay, great. Thank you, Regina. So we'll go ahead and close public comments on item 6.2 and bring it back to the council for further deliberation.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to hear from our legal counsel. There was various opinions rendered as to reasons why our system was flawed, specifically the subjectivity of it. Perhaps Ashley or John.
Hi, Councilmember Acuna. This is Ashley. I don't know if John was planning to speak. I do have a couple of points that hopefully can be helpful to the council. First, as to Mr. Clarici's comments, they are intended to provide some insight and context. I would also note, however, he is speaking on his own behalf as one of the individuals on the selection committee, not necessarily as formal testimony of the entire body of the committee. And so there was necessarily a lot of personal comments and opinions. I apologize. Regarding that process. That's part of the reason that in the staff report, we instead focused on the scoring more so than just the recommendation, because as some of the public comments have noted, there were claims on some of the appeals that the final selection was based on some unstated standards in the application procedures. And so, ultimately, it is the council's discretion to find that there is an independent basis for issuing permits, and that could include upholding the city manager's decision. But what I would recommend, and as stated in the staff report, is that along with that, council should find that the procedural errors that you've already determined happened were not so fundamental that they resulted in prejudice to the other applicants. And then articulate, the reasoning in phase 3 to support your decision. Those are the comments that I have right now. I don't know if John had additional things to add.
Actually, what I was going to comment was pretty much the last comments that Ashley made about if you're going to support the city manager's decision, I think you're going to have to find, as Ashley just said, that the errors that were made that are part of the resolutions that you approved earlier tonight were not so fundamental that they resulted in prejudice. And I think we need to kind of explain why that is the case and not just make that conclusion. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that if you look, for example, at the rankings that HDL did on their scoring, and then you look at the rankings after the mid-process appeal, the rankings are all the same, except for the last two where they flip-flopped. There were 13 applicants that were ranked by HDL, 12 and 13 flip-flopped after the mid-process appeals because one of them got some additional relief as a result of the appeals, but it wasn't enough to get them even up to the 80%. So there was really no consequence to the other applicants. The mid-process appeals, as indicated by one of the comments, I think could be viewed as something that corrected errors by HDL and brought forward two applicants that deserve to be considered in phase 3. And the support for that is exactly what you see in what the selection committee did. They scored both of those applicants very high, which tells me that they deserve to be in that selection process in phase 3. Those are the kinds of things I think you need to look at. And actually, I don't know if there's other things you want to add to that, but you've got to make a determination that the errors did not result in any fundamental prejudice to the other applicants. And as I say, one of the other things we mentioned, if you look at the scoring in phase 3 independently, and I think you could do that, different body of people than what you had with HDL. Criteria was there, it was laid out. Yes, there's going to be some subjectivity in how you view a application or how you view an interview, but you have a criteria that you're judging them against. So that's the objectivity. I'm not sure you can say that therefore that was arbitrary or totally subjective. Actually, I'll defer to you from that.
I have nothing further to add.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had a question.
Yes.
I guess for Cleve and the city attorney is, it was clear in the application process that this third step of this was going to involve an interview committee. So the idea, go.
That's correct, yes.
So it's in there, all the applicants knew that. So if there's concern about, then I mean, if I was an applicant, I could see, all right, I want to make sure my application is going to stand up to subjective. Just as we've heard that a couple of people have suggested that that is totally inappropriate and not unacceptable for us to move forward because this panel of experts, if you will, could have been subjective in their decision-making process. I think would it be fair to say that you accept that when you accept the entire application process? That that's a reality of what's going to happen?
I think anytime there is an interview and you've got 4 different people looking at standards, I think you'd be hard pressed to say there's no subjectivity in there. Go ahead, John.
Might just add to Cleve's comments. In the application procedures, which all the applicants had, it describes phase 3, interview and second ranking, and it talks about total of 2,300 points. And it basically said that the applicants who score at least 80% in phase 2 will be interviewed and evaluated by the selection committee. They do set out in those procedures the distribution of points, everything from qualification as owners, location, neighborhood compatibility plan, the things that were required to be in their application. So as an applicant, I know what the committee is looking for. But I think it flies in the face of common sense to think that I would just walk in there and not present these very organized or be very prepared as long as I have all this covered. When you go through an interview, the way you present those things makes a lot of difference. And that, to me, is just common sense, and anybody should expect that. So, yeah, there's going to be some subjectivity, but does that make the process flawed? Not necessarily. I mean, sure, if somebody says that Mr. Parigi favored an applicant because his daughter went to school with them, that would be an issue, but he didn't say that. He didn't say that at all. So.
Where was I? The review committee, they did not have the HDL. I just want to clarify this again. They did not have the HDL information when they started their review process.
That's my understanding. They did not know the rankings before that.
Which
when they did their interviews. So they did their own independently. And that's why I'm saying, if you look at those scores that the selection committee did, they're not influenced by what HCL did. That was a whole separate process, and it's a standalone process. Those people were on an equal footing there.
And I wanted to follow up by asking the city manager, you were the keeper of that, the integrity of that information and making sure that they did not see that, any inappropriate information before their process?
That's correct, well, myself and HDL, yes.
And that committee was made up of a community development director, city planner, the current police chief, a former council member, and a sitting council member.
Correct.
And I would think that a sitting police chief, given the training that's involved, would be a high caliber committee member, given the nature of their work and their need to understand people, processes, and procedures. So, I see that as a pretty solid recommendation. That
I think one of the things they're taught is to understand people,
Absolutely.
read people, you know, so.
The idea that the HDL process and the the HDL scoring and the mid-process appeals, I mean, we've already found and made motions to recognize that. And one of the speakers mentioned that we were still in the appeal process, and we're not in the appeal process. This is the agenda item here is to move forward. Now, the appeal is closed.
Correct.
This just happens to be piggybacked in the same meeting. So this is a whole new day, and we have the opportunity to decide how we can move this thing forward.
Councilmember Acuna, I agree with you, but I kind of want to make it clear that you've decided the merits of the various claims on the appeal. Resolution is there. Now, what you're looking at is, what do we do as a result of what we decided? Do we start the process over? Do we go ahead and what the city manager did, finding that the errors were not fundamentally prejudicial, or do we do something different? So, yes, what you said is correct, but I just wanted to clarify a little bit more.
That's great. Thank you, John. I'll let my colleagues want to chime in.
Absolutely. Colleagues, any other comments at this point?
So we would be looking for a motion to either direct staff or looking for a motion to grant licenses. And it would be based on the work of the cannabis group.
Well, that kind of doesn't do what John said, does it? I mean, he said that we should, the way I understood it, we should have a discussion on what we want to do. But we need to decide what we want to do before we can make a motion.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yes.
So, part of my thought process is I'm looking at these options. I've heard what all the people who spoke during the comment period said, and I'm looking for, understanding the difference between HDL and their initial scoring, and what a definitive line there is between that and the scoring committee. And setting that aside and looking at the phase 3, I through the whole process, I was really trying to evaluate, give me a reason why not to accept that committee's recommendation. When they put the time and energy in, interviewed everybody, gave us their honest opinion. The only one that I heard, and it didn't hold merit for me, was the subjectivity and objectivity. But as our counselor said, counsel said that and I agree completely. If I go into an interview in any sense of an interview, you don't go in as a robot, because they're actually interviewing you, as well as they're seeing you and they're feeling the experience they have interviewing you, and that, all that's, like you said, it would be what's the right word? Silly to think that those don't play into the factors of an interview process. Otherwise, you could fill out a piece of paper, submit that, and that would be your interview.
Yeah, that would be it, yeah.
And so there is some sense, some level of objectivity and subjectivity to the interview process. And so that was the one thing, well, that doesn't work either. And so it really helped, kind of move me towards the committee. And that's why we have committees. We put committees in place, whether it's a planning commission, a committee for Parks and Rec. We put all these committees and commissions in place to do that work, to spend that time, and to give us their honest opinion after they've done a lot of the work. And I'd have to find good reasons why not to accept that. And I had a hard time through this process finding those reasons. When we step back and we take a look at phase 3. Now, if we want to go with phase 3, and it's still a question, I really appreciate the work they put in, and I find that they, I respect the fact that they did that, and that I didn't find any reason not to take their recommendation.
I think that's where we're at. We need to focus on the findings of phase 3, and I don't.
Yeah, my one.
Wording correct.
Yeah, and I mean, the only thing I want to bring up is I do think numbers matter. And so we've we've pushed them aside on the HDL. We have a phase 3 scoring that potentially could get pushed aside. So if we're going to make findings, I do think we need to have something of a solid foundation in order to make those findings. And so I do want to have a conversation about the numbers that are in front of us in terms of the phase 3 scoring, if that's the way we were going to go, because they do differ from what, and I understand from Mr. Clarici why they did it and why there might be a disconnect, but the process itself was also founded in a scoring system, and so the applicants, there's not an unreasonable sense that there was a scoring mechanism to this. And so I'm a little concerned about just setting aside the scoring completely from all of this as we move forward.
Mike, could I ask one question?
Yes.
John, how much, you said they're going to, whoever we choose, they're going to be re-vetted or vetted again. What kind of a process is that?
Well,
That would, in other words, I'm thinking when they're going to vet these folks again, so that would be, to me, reassuring that we made the right decision. Because
it's not reevaluating their applications.
No.
It's just looking for things that have changed in that, since that.
to see that they still qualify on the
Exactly.
same.
I mean, there's been allusions to, people have alluded to the fact that one of the applicants that's up there potentially may have an issue with their license.
Right.
And so that's got to be looked into and see what's going on there. Does it affect the ability to have their license here? What were the reasons, et cetera? Has something come up which would disqualify them? Some of the others may have, as I said, changes in financial structure or ownership or location. All of those would be judged against the ordinance to make sure that they're in compliance with our ordinance, because our ordinance does, as actually said in the presentation, allow for changes of location and changes in ownership, and it does set forth the criteria that we look at in that. So that should be pretty easy to do. Most of that stuff we can take care of as the situation arises in-house. HDL can maybe do a little bit of that vetting when it comes to maybe the licensure issues, those kinds of things.
And a further clarification, Mr. Mayor?
Absolutely.
From our distinguished legal staff, was there any part of the appeals that was related to the scoring with the phase 3 interview process?
And all due respect to one of the commenters who said that he felt that phase 3 was a subject of appeal. None of the appeals directly attacked the phase 3 scoring. I think that commentator was probably arguing that in the sense that, well, if there was a problem the phase 1 scoring by HDL, or the mid-process appeals, and that led to somebody being able to get to phase 3, then the phase 3 scoring is suspect. I think that's a stretch. I think the phase 3 scoring stands alone. And as I said, nobody in the appeals directly said, and the phase 3 scoring was flawed for these reasons.
Does the motion need to include wording that the previous process has not prejudiced?
I think Ashley just.
Oh, I might, maybe
I heard a little voice.
I did hear somebody.
Right, yes, sorry to jump in. I just had one other thing to add on whether or not one of the appeals directly challenged the interview process. The answer is no. I agree with John. I just wanted to provide some more clarification. It was specifically the appellant TMG. And actually, I pulled up their appeal. I have it in front of me. And one of their claims was that the city's evaluation criteria was ambiguous and unfair. They addressed the scoring issue with both phase 2 and phase 3 scoring. But their claim was that the scoring was not, would have been more fairly apportioned if it was given an all or nothing basis, and that there was no breakdown of scores in the evaluation criteria. We did analyze that in the initial consideration of this claim on appeal and the issue of how to apportion scores. And ultimately, the application procedures did actually include a breakdown of each category and how many points could be awarded within each category. And so we disagree that it was fundamentally unfair the way that that happened. There was no direct challenge to the actual interview process or the phase 3 scores separate and apart from the HDL scoring.
Just trying to make clarifying statements out there from all of our experts that who identified this process and what was involved in it from start to finish.
So,
Yeah, no.
so
Mayor.
the committee went from, they took 2 applicants that were, they did not follow the scoring schedule when they applied the applicants. Is their justification or just their recommendation based on the full committee's unanimous vote for those 3 applicants to be the top 3? Is that, in the broader sense, is that justifiable for them to bring that forward? So essentially, that's what we're asking the committee to do, is give us their best recommendation based on their process.
Yeah, obviously the cleanest thing is to go by the scoring.
Mm-hmm.
But I think your question goes to the issue of certain amount of subjectiveness, and that's going to be inherent in the interview process. Ashley, help me out a little bit if you can, but I really think that's the best answer I can give you at this point.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that it is a little bit unclear, and I think that's why the council is struggling to figure out how to evaluate that and what weight to give it. The application procedures did state that there would be an interview and that the city manager, in making his decision, would consider the selection committee's recommendation. In that regards, the selection committee making a recommendation and the city manager following it was consistent with the application procedures. I think one of the issues is that the application procedures did not necessarily provide a clear breakdown of how the interviews would be used in the recommendation process. Now, one of the things I've heard the council discuss and that I do agree with is, you are free to look at the qualifications of the committee itself in evaluating the applicants and making their recommendation. And those are also relevant facts to consider. So I do think that it's appropriate for you to consider what their recommendation was. Part of the reason we've continued to fall back on the scoring as well, though, is that it does provide, on paper and in the record, some validity to that process as well, which is what was detailed in the application procedures that the applicants were working with.
Thank you, Ashley.
I think I'm ready to try and make a motion if you want to try it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Driscoll, does the motion need to include wording that clarifies the lack of prejudice? But the process has not been prejudiced by the previous appeal process, or what do you want me? How do we need to do this?
You're talking about the original, the first.
Yeah, there was
the
concern,
first part.
and so I totally understand that where we're going.
I think, if I'm understanding it, I didn't hear you very well.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to talk two different directions. Does the motion need to include wording that addresses the fact that the council has not been prejudiced by any previous actions?
I think that would be a good idea to include in your motion that you determine that the process, or that the applicants were not prejudiced, that it was not fundamentally, let me spit this out better, that the errors which you referred to in your previous resolutions on the appeals were not fundamentally prejudicial to the other applicants in the process.
If I may make a suggestion, I think on page 4 of your staff report, in that first paragraph, there's a line in there that has some suggested language as well, that the council should find that the procedural errors, were not so fundamental that they resulted in prejudice to the other applicants, and that there is sufficient independent reason and evidence for making your decision now.
She said it much better than I did.
She did.
She read that, right?
Oh.
It's
the bottom of the top paragraph.
The bottom of the top paragraph. Okay.
Yep.
Paragraph, yeah, last sentence, basically.
Okay.
On page 4.
On the top of page 4, basically, right?
Right in here, right here.
Bottom of the top paragraph. No, okay. I got it. I found it. Thank you, Ashley. All right. So, let me get started here. I'll make a motion that the council find that the procedural errors were not fundamental and have resulted in prejudice to the other applicants, that there is sufficient independent reason and evidence for upholding the decision. And I would further move that the council issue 3 cannabis licenses to the highest rated eligible applicants as identified by the application review committee.
Is that?
So are you saying by according to the scoring?
The scoring as submitted by the Cannabis Application Review Committee.
So just to make it clear, that would be Sacred Roots, Chuck's, and 3 Habitat, correct?
Yes, and you'll notice that I said the top 3 eligible. In the event that someone isn't eligible, so that it will, well, my attempt is to try and allow this to fall down in case somebody's circumstances don't allow. If it went to a number 4, so that they could move forward.
So isn't that upholding our city managers?
No, it would be one deviation in that reserve house is number 5 on that number. So it would be.
This is strictly the ad hoc committee's recommendation.
Scoring.
scoring.
Recommendation is different.
It's not their recommendation.
So let me put it, did I say scoring? Eligible applicants, no, as identified by the application review committee.
Right. It's their scoring, but not their recommendation.
They recommend.
Okay, I'll change it to the highest ranking, to the top highest scored eligible applicants. The top 3 issued 3 cannabis licenses to the highest scored eligible applicants as identified by the application review committee.
Yeah.
If I may make one clarification, it sounds like the intent would be that if one of those 3 were unable or unwilling to move forward on their permit, the intent would be that you would move down the next one on the ranked list, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the purpose of that is to continue to recognize the work that that committee did. And that,
So based on that, what is number 4?
well, right now, as far as we know, it's 1, 2, and 3.
Number 4 is element 7.
But
Element
number 4 would
7?
be element 7.
Okay,
And so on.
Right. And then, right.
So on down the,
okay.
so that's my motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Could you say it again? Sure. Please.
I gotta find this page over here. First, I'll make the motion to find that the council finds that the procedural errors were not fundamental and that have not resulted in prejudice to the other applicants, and that there is sufficient independent reason and evidence for upholding the decision, and to issue 3 cannabis licenses to the top, 3 cannabis licenses to the highest scored eligible applicants as identified by the application review committee. Which is their scoring. You want me to identify who's on that committee?
No.
We go down in history. All right, so that's my motion.
Okay. That makes sense, Patty?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second on that motion?
I will second it.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Further discussion? Yep, we can.
I just want to be sure we get it right.
Yep.
Well, the other alternative would be to have staff, legal counsel draw it up and bring it back, but I hate to do that.
No, I think we owe it to the committee members, and, well, it's still gonna come back because they have to do the findings and then bring it back to us,
Yeah.
but,
If the motion were to get a second, and not to have a second, but if it were to pass, I would ask you to direct staff, as you did last time, to bring back formal, resolution and findings.
Oh, heck, I wouldn't have used so many legal words if I'd known that.
okay.
I guess, would it be okay if I commented at this point?
You can, yep, we're at discussion.
There was, and it was obvious, a lot of folks commented that one of the, probably the most favorite, one of the suggestions this evening was to go to 5, 7, 10 licenses. And as having been part of the council that was involved in a very difficult and thorough public hearing process to set this at 3, there was a very real concern about the process. That one of the speakers mentioned that the city voted to have cannabis. The city did not support cannabis sales. The state initiative is why we are here this evening. So there's a clear message that 3 was what was acceptable to this community a year and a half, 2 years ago now at this point. So I, for one, wouldn't be so quick to suggest changing that.
Right.
It would have to go back for full public hearing, in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was part of that decision. I was a newbie, but I was certainly part. I think that might have been my first meeting, actually.
It was easy.
I think it was my birthday, I think, too.
You went not with the recommendation of the committee, but with the scoring of the committee.
Yeah.
And how is that, how are you, what is your thinking on that?
Well, I'm just trying to cement in that they sat through and reviewed in a blind way, without any input from any of the other process. They sat through this, and this is their ranking.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable with if there's a little better wording to identify that work. I'm fine with modifying.
You're kind of leaning more towards the numerical scoring as they put it down, and then
Just their
kind of
1, 2, 3.
pushing aside a little bit of the objectivity where they moved some of them around.
That final deliberation that they went through after they had done everything and submitted it.
Because that's not the scoring they came up with, right?
Yeah, there's
I'm sorry, this is the scoring they came up with, but that's not the recommendation they had to the city.
Right, because the recommendation included the original reserve house.
I would be using the scoring as they have it on page 5 of the staff.
Okay, just, yeah.
Yep.
And I'd be happy to add that to my motion.
I just want to make sure you're clear about one thing. I don't believe, and I'm going to ask the two members of the committee that are in the back, but once they had done their scores, when they were doing their deliberation, I don't think they even saw who would score the highest. That went into a computer that HDL had. So they were given a recommendation based on everything that they had gathered, but they didn't know who got the highest score.
So it would be.
Well, it makes it even more.
Right.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
I was reading and listening. Yeah, and on the top of page 5, the phase 3 scoring, excluding HDLs, rank applicants as follows. And that phase 3 scoring was a result of the committee's work.
Right.
And Dennis, you did a great job outlining the work that we ask committees to do all the time.
And it's not consistent with their recommendation either.
So I guess I would.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and.
Okay.
But in this,
You want to make sure it's crystal
what
clear.
you just said, reserve house is rated 5.
Right.
Right.
So that's, I mean,
Okay.
you're talking about the score, but they're not in the first 3.
The ranked applicants.
Right. I just wanted to have that discussion.
Is that?
So their recommendation had reserve house as the third applicant and not 3 habitat. Their scoring is as you see it.
Yeah, that needs to
Okay.
be
So
kind of separated.
Where is their ranking?
That is their ranking. It just came out differently than what their final deliberative discussion was. However,
It
and
says they rank the applicants as follows.
because there was some difference in between what they put into the computer when they had the little tablets and what they finally came to as a group that had reserve house as their third pick. So I don't know if that's where you're going with it. I mean, from my perspective, I actually support that because I support the numerical one because I think it's the cleanest way for us to have a definitive foundation for us to base our findings on, as opposed to just sort of the general recommendation that came out.
I guess these would support the fact that in that sense of it being a blind thing, they didn't know, and this is how it came out.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
But to be clear, it wasn't their final recommendation, though.
I know, that's what, that's kind of.
And this is okay. This is part of the process.
Yeah, no.
But this is, I'd still to say,
Yep.
I guess, and I'm not following you because I don't see because this specifically says the phase 3 scoring excluding HDL scoring rank the applicants as follows.
Yeah, their numerical score. Their recommendation is.
Can we get a clarification from the committee member?
I think they.
Can I make one
They-
comment here?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, you're stating it right.
Yeah.
The committee, the scoring came out as is shown here. That was the scoring,
Okay.
okay? However, as I think committee member Casey mentioned, they considered a lot of factors and all of that. And their recommendation coming out of
That's
that
different than what you
did
said,
not
then.
match what these scores did, okay? One thing I want to mention quickly,
I don't need to know.
I'm fine with whatever direction you go. Something that has not been pointed out a lot, I don't think this process has been mentioned, but I don't think anybody's really talked about a lot, is the fact that the number 5 scorer on this list is the only one that is submitted for a micro business. And that was one of the factors that I think weighed heavily on the committee, and it was probably the biggest consideration that I took in moving them up.
Well, and I noticed that one of the other applicants did mention that, and she, the lady from Chuck's,
Yes.
and she,
Anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Exactly.
Point. I don't think Mr. Gleason talked a lot about that, but I just want to make, that was somewhat of a factor we considered in that final recommendation.
So it would be the top 3 recommended by the ad hoc committee,
yeah,
not the score.
it wouldn't be the score.
Correct.
Top 3 that the ad hoc committee recommended.
Right, not the score.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just, again, I will caution the council again that
And it's coming back again.
we are going with, and it's no disrespect, because I think what the committee did was fantastic, and 2 out of those 3 would be in the numerical score. My only concern is that if we just go with the recommendation, there's not an actual numerical foundation for why we did it. So I would then, I guess, request, if we're not going with some sort of numerical foundation that's been part of this entire process, that we have findings to show why the numerical score was not part of why we're making these recommendations. Because I do think that leaves us open to some
But that is,
questioning.
isn't that based on our questioning John? I mean, you know, if we went along with what you're saying, we'd have the whole committee here so we could question them, or, you know, to find their reasons why. I mean, or to give us, you're asking for reasons.
Right, the findings. I want our findings
I
to be
get
as
it.
solid as possible.
But other than us interviewing the applicants again,
Right.
you know, making it's just like.
We take a 5-minute break.
Yes,
I promise we'll keep it a bit.
yes, absolutely. We will take a 5-minute break. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna come back into session. And so we've left this, I think we had some discussion on the rankings that staff may have some clarification for us, as well as maybe some language.
I know there's been some confusion about Councilmember Acuna's motion, and some discussion about what if we want to go with the recommendation as opposed to the actual scores by the selection committee. And can you do that? Can you make some findings? I think you can. Ashley and I have been discussing this, as you know. I think you can make the determination, and based upon the qualifications of the committee, you have a police chief, you have a planner, you have a former present city council person, that you can give the recommendation greater weight. I think you can also add to that the recommendation was a product of an opportunity for the committee to get together and actually at one time compare all the applicants rather than in a bifurcated proceeding. And that included in that comparison were license types. And I think you can actually have a motion to that effect with the motion that's still on the floor. Procedurally, you can have 2 motions on the floor. And when you vote on the most recent motion. But I think there's enough basis in the record that with those kinds of determination, if you want to go with the recommendation of the selection committee as opposed to the scoring, you can do that.
Okay.
We'll produce some findings that will support that.
And would it be a preferred method of 2 motions, or could Councilmember Acuna just restate his motion.
I'd be happy to.
I would do the second motion,
Okay.
and then if that motion passes, the first motion becomes moot. If that motion doesn't pass, then you have the first motion to still vote on.
So, of
Okay.
course, my motion that was on the floor included the wording that would identify that the council has not been prejudiced. The process has not been prejudiced. I would include that wording in my motion.
I mean, if you want to withdraw your motion, and
Let's do that.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion.
Yeah.
Would you withdraw your
I
second?
will withdraw my
My
second.
goodness, I'm happy that she did that. Let's read this prejudice wording again.
Yeah, would you just?
I think a motion that the council find that the procedural errors were not so fundamental that they result in prejudice to the other applicants. And that the council issue 3 cannabis licenses, no, excuse me, let me start over again. Based on the qualifications of the ad hoc application review committee, the council issued 3 cannabis licenses to the highest ranked eligible applicants as recommended by the application review committee.
I suggest you may want to add something to that motion. Then included in there, you say that the recommendation of the committee was based upon a deliberative process where they were all able to get together at one time and discuss the relative merits of each of the applicants, and that they were able to consider such things as the license types involved as well.
That wouldn't be included in my motion.
As well as the qualifications of the, or is that a step of the committee?
Yes, yes. And then one other thing we can address this, or we can address in a separate motion, is if we need to think about if one of these applicants either elects not to go forward or cannot go forward, are you going to backfill that position? And if so, would you use the alternates the city manager selected, which I believe was based upon the recommendation of the city, of the committee? You can do that separately if you want to.
Let's do that separately.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty long.
I will,
I
that
think
was the longest motion I think I've ever seconded, but whatever John said.
Yeah.
Your motion and what John asked that you add on.
And for clarification, so that we're all on the same page, I just want to state what this would do would award licenses to Sacred Roots, Chuck's Cannabis Collective, and Reserve House.
Right.
Is that correct? Is that all our understanding?
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Thank you.
All right.
That's my motion.
Okay. So we have a first and a second. Any? Yes, Councilmember Burley, seconded. Any further discussion, comments? All right, seeing none, roll call, please.
Mayor Saragosa,
She is still there. Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Acuna,
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli.
Aye.
Okay, that measure passes 4-0.
Is there a need for a motion regarding if one of those? What is your? Or one of those applicants?
John,
What was the recommendation?
yeah.
As far as who they were, recommendations for the alternates were to this year, Canatopia, CN Holding, and Street House. Yeah, that was based on the committee recommendation also. I did follow that. That's what their recommendation was for the alternate.
Is that a separate motion?
That's what John suggested that
I'll
we do.
move that then.
Then I'll second it.
Okay, we have a,
Just for clarification, the motion would be that if one of the selected 3 applicants that you identified in the previous motion were not able to proceed for whatever reason, that position would be backfilled in the order of the alternates selected by the city manager and recommended by the committee.
And recommended by, that's correct.
Can you-
That would be my motion.
Can I get that list again? I'm sorry.
Canatopia was first on that list.
Okay.
CM Holdings was number 2, and 3 Habitat Consulting was number 3.
Oh, 3 habitat, okay. One, so, yeah, never mind. That's okay. 1 plant, 3 habitat, okay, gotcha. Gotcha.
Did you second that one too?
Yes, Councilmember Borelli seconded that. And we don't need, I mean, this is part of the same, it's not, I know that this particular thing wasn't on the agenda. Is that any, doesn't matter on this because it's connected. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so with that then, if no further comments, roll call please.
Mayor Zaragoza,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Acuna,
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli.
Aye.
All right, I think we have a process that's come to an end.
Nothing on the agenda.
What is the, I'd like to know how long.
Yeah, so next steps from staff, I know that they'll have to go back and check everybody's due diligence on their background. But what's the time frame? Do we know going forward?
They'll bring back a formal resolution with formal findings for the council. I'm not sure if we're gonna make it for next Tuesday's meeting, but we're gonna try. If not, it'll certainly be at your regular meeting after that. And then in terms of, going ahead, I defer to Cleve.
Yeah, well, once we have that, we will begin to work with the applicants. We'll need to have them submit and make sure that nothing has changed on the 2 items, location and ownership, which for these 3, as far as I know, in discussions I've heard, that it has not allowed to confirm that. And then we will want to redo a background check on that to make sure there's no issues that have arisen in the last year since we last did that. So we'll go through that process once again. Shouldn't take too long, maybe a month to do that. My recommendation is though that once we do that background check, we'll issue the license to them and give them 1 year to get it up and running. If they fail, then we can follow that to the next.
Thank you, Cleve. So just, I want to thank the committee, and we have 2 here this evening, Mr. Clarici and Chief Wren, then Mr. Rivas, and then our colleague, Councilmember Taylor, for all their work on this to get us to this point, as well as staff and outside counsel. Ashley, thank you for all the work on this. This has been a tough road, but I think we came to a really good decision here. And we'll look forward to see this move on. So with that,
Could I also
yes,
just add one more thing?
absolutely.
I want to thank all the participants, all the applicants. They all just, I just respect all of them as good business people, and I think they all knew what, the dilemma we had and what was involved, and hopefully they'll still come to Placerville.
Yes.
Think of us in a good light.
Well, and yes, well said. And so with that, I will adjourn this special meeting of the Placerville City Council. Thank you and good night.